Today on Driving.ca, a work-size pickup that doesn't have any springs in the back. This is the 2023 Ram 1500 Limited Elite, one of the top trims of the new Ram 1500 and a pretty steep toy at some $105,000 for a half ton. The 1500 comes in a few flavors these days, a number of which you're probably at least a little accustomed with. The one we're testing today is the 5.7 liter Hemi E-Torque. This is an evolution of the engine that we all know quite familiar, but with a 12 kilowatt integrated starter generator running a 48 volt mild hybrid system. Don't panic just yet though, because this hybrid is pretty out of the way, and if I'm honest, I kinda wish it did more. When it comes to that load-in, you've got a couple options as well, but coming from the trades, I can't say that this fully loaded box is one that I would have ticked. For starters, we've got this split tailgate. It's a neat option. It's an easy way to throw things in there without having to hoist the whole gate open. With that being said, particularly with this hydraulically assisted one, it's really no big deal to open this thing properly. Likewise, closing is fine. Also equipped here is the new Ram box feature introduced just a few years back. It's a neat gimmick, and I gotta say, being able just to toss screw guns in the back is really nice. I've been spoiled working with E350 vans, so I've never really had to worry about things disappearing from my bed. But if you insist on a pickup or you need a fifth wheel, this is a compelling option for easy stowage. Other applications for the tailgating crowd include the ability to use it as a beer cooler, and you can just drain that melted ice water out the bottom through a little plug. Personally, I chuckle at people's enthusiasm for this or the Ford Lightning Frunk, because lockable storage is nothing new to those of us who just used vans like a sensible trade would. Now, if you need a fifth wheel or the like, it does make a lot more sense. Granted, at the expense of significant bed space. Climbing in the back there, you've only got about an inch either side for a typical pallet load-in. Having hauled a couple skid loads in the backs of these things, I would much prefer the clearance of the typical two-hump setup. Having said that, I must give credit to Ram for what I feel is probably the sturdiest of any of the kick-out bed steps. Whereas the Ford step out of the tailgate feels a little flimsy with that square tube channel, and the GM product often feels like it's already seizing up from new. This thing is a chonker. It is a solid cast piece. I have no hesitation climbing up here with way too much weight on my own person. It's great. Flip open this split tailgate, and it's an even easier walk-in. Looking farther in the back here, we've also got this load divider, which is available on a couple of the Ram models, and which I'm actually quite partial toward. The lockable toggle in the middle spreads its wings, locking it between the different ribs along the bed's length. It's a good way of holding loads in place forward against the front of the bed, keeping things from sliding back and forth. It's easily stowable in the back, and overall, I think a very wise investment for a lot of people who otherwise might play it fast and loose. Remember that just because an item is in the bed of your truck does not mean that it's actually secured. Items need to be held forward in place and strapped down securely such that any ministry personnel could not argue that they could hit a bump and hop out over the sides. Now, suspension is an interesting point on this generation Ram, and it's a great strength, but I must admit, a bit of a weakness. First off, the advantages. Obviously, that air suspension enables the truck to level itself. That's good for greater payload in the back, steadier, more stable ride when you're going with a big trailer, and overall greater comfort with heavy tongue weights. Right now, I've got the truck set in the tall off-road mode. It does, however, have a little selector on the dash that gives you access to 4 other heights. For those loading 2x4s into the back, or who simply want a lifestyle truck for their families, this has another great asset as well, which is that there's a selectable load-in height. Just press the button on the dash or the one on the key fob, it'll go progressively in steps. So I alluded earlier to that suspension setup, and as equipped here, it is quite interesting. The optional air suspension replaces all of the truck's springs with large, heavy-duty airbags. And for those working with this thing, it is an attractive option, enabling not only high-riding off-road clearance on job sites, it also lowers itself quite significantly automatically or at the press of a button. Once ready to hit the road, the truck raises itself right back up. On the road without a load, I've got to admit that suspension is not ideal. It's actually a pretty firm ride, and yes, it's handy that it's able to lower itself for a more aerodynamic, efficient drive, but overall, I actually find that I prefer the ride of a pickup on springs. Not only is it harsh just on the regular stuff, but when you're going over speed bumps and some harsh expansion joints, it actually bangs as though the bottom is falling out of the truck. It's just not really a sensation that I would expect for $105,000. With that being said, those who are hauling, and particularly with really heavy tongue weights, will benefit from that. Keeping the truck level and steady is huge in this kind of driving. At that point, you've got to be making a very conscious investment for this sort of thing. A further consideration on this checkbox should be that an air suspension is inherently more complex than conventional springs and struts and more expensive to run in the long run. We can't speak to how this particular unit will hold up over so many years, but as a general rule, in Canadian winters, condensation does generally find its way into these sorts of systems, and when that freezes, that can cause big headaches. If you have to replace lines or worse, you're looking at a pretty significant outlay. And really, I must say, the standard Ram suspension is quite good. Ram has evolved its setups, and the 1500 is now running independent fronts and coil-sprung rears from standard. Still a solid axle, it's plenty stiff and hardy, but you've got twin tube dampers on each side, and those progressive rate springs are a lot more familiar if you're planning on doing other stuff that's not officially sanctioned. Now, there's a fair bit more to this fully loaded truck than just the suspension setup. This really is a showcase of all the comforts that Ram is offering nowadays, and it really does highlight why these are some of the nicest, most pleasant cruising cabins on the market right now in the segment. Materials are thoughtful and quite nice, and there is quite a lot of very thoughtful storage throughout this cabin. It's very configurable and in-depth, but it remains very intuitive. I really quite like the way I've been able to stash stuff around in this thing. The 12-way power adjustable seats are plenty comfortable, and not only are they heated and ventilated, but in this particular model, you even get heated and ventilated rear bench. That's pretty wild, I've gotta say. Right here we've got the upgraded 12-inch screen, which, while is larger than some people's tastes may like, is pretty nicely executed with the new Uconnect software. Down the base of that, we've got our integrated trailer brake controls, which are quite nicely installed. The brake control slider falls easily to hand with the gain adjustments right above it. We've also got Ram's new trailer steering feature, which is a nifty little gimmick that may prove handy for some users, though I suspect most people who are getting serious about towing probably going to find their way without it. Cruising as I am down the highway right now, we've got pretty normal, up-to-date driver assists. The adaptive cruise and lane keeping are easily monitored through this all-digital instrument cluster now. It's not the most configurable display down there, but it does give you access to everything you need and within pretty easy reach. On the road, the 2023 Ram 1500 is really as we've known it for the last couple years. The new platform was introduced in 2019, and it was a big step for the model lineup. The 1500 half-ton is now as big as a lot of the 2500s of years past. And I gotta say, I don't love that for driving it as I am in the city. Out in the country, that's alright, and to be honest, it opens up a lot of capabilities. Depending on how you spec a Ram 1500 now, you are good, hypothetically, up to 12,750 pounds on a low distributing hitch. That's tremendous. You get that multi-link in their heavy-duty trucks now too, and I gotta say they've become some of my favorites. Ram has been facing an uphill battle, overcoming a legacy for questionable quality in past years, but this new generation does seem to be holding together pretty well, and initial impressions in a new vehicle like this are some of the strongest on the market. The most noteworthy changes you're going to find with this new generation of trucks is under the hood. This Limited that I'm driving runs the old 5.7 V8, but a little different. This one is the e-torque mild hybrid, a relatively low intrusion 48-volt system. You don't even notice that it's a hybrid, and Ram, probably prudently for its target audience, has really kept any hints in the overall drive experience completely invisible. Instead, this hybrid system is just focused on adding that little bit of torque to ease things off the line. Specific output depends on the model, but you're generally looking at a battery capacity of about half a kilowatt hour, and apparently up to 120 pound-feet of torque. Of course, the 5.7 on its own was no slouch either. As you see it here, you're looking at 395 horsepower and 410 pound-feet of torque, which is pretty sweet. Step up to the 3-liter Eco Diesel, which is also available in Jeeps and a whole range of other models. If you're towing a lot and splurge on the 3-liter Eco Diesel, you're looking at some pretty great numbers there too. 480 pound-feet of torque and rated combined fuel economy as good as 8 liters per 100. Now, in realistic driving, I'd expect that combined figure probably to come out closer to 10 for your average footed person, but that's still pretty remarkable for such a large vehicle. With that being said, you don't get into the Eco Diesel or the 5.7 straight away. There are 9 trims to choose from for the 2023 Ram, and you've got to spec up towards 70K before you start getting into the 5.7s. Standard is the 3.6-liter Pentastar V6, which is a fine engine, gives you 305 horsepower and 269 pound-feet of torque. That's not much for work, but if someone's just looking for a lifestyle truck to be the biggest on the block, that should do it. There's a sportier and more aggressive off-road oriented Rebel model, which comes in from 72K. That thing equips bigger shocks, an electronically locking diff, all that good stuff. And then from there, it just keeps going up. This here Limited starts from about 85. As equipped here, you're looking at 105. Really, that's only 6K shy of getting into a TRX. Of course, the Hell Ram is a different truck, and we're not going to get into that kind of stuff today. So, riding high in this Ram here, how do I feel? Well, it's a very nicely executed truck with a lot of goodies, some really great feature content in this thing. Overall cabin experience, I'm quite pleased with. Materials, HUD, tech, it's all here. I do have those qualms about certain issues. The air suspension should be bought by a mindful buyer, not just for the sake of ticking that box. Likewise, the Eco Diesel is a niche product, and I suspect most people will probably be happiest with this e-torque here. I do personally wish that the e-torque was a slightly more aggressive hybrid system. We are leaning into the era of the hybrid right now, and the Ford Power Boost does come out ahead there. Not least of all because it also adds functionality like being able to run a welder out of the bed. That's fantastic. Ram box and the other rear end gimmicks may suit your lifestyle, may suit your trades, may not. If you're looking at this as a work truck, I would highly recommend sizing that up in person because, as mentioned, that pallet width is a concern. That said, being able to throw those tools in, if they fit, is a really neat and handy feature there in the sides. I can't say that I'd be jumping to spend $100,000 on a half-ton for the work that I've done, but it is a pretty compelling product. For Driving.ca, I'm Al Alder. For more pickup news, reviews, and previews, be sure to check us out online on Driving.ca, where you can see more specs and read the full review of this truck.